I'll give you one other example. And DEA is not perfect. We had an agent who was a very good friend of mine who worked considerable undercover. He was Cuban American. His wife was an agent. He was, I don't want to, he's still living, so I don't want to say something here that I would get sued over, but he got transferred back to South Florida as a group supervisor, and his group was doing money pickups. And he had become so confident in his undercover abilities that he went and did a money pickup by himself. Well, what do you do if you got $700,000, $800,000, $1 million? What do you do with it? So he walked into the bank, he badged them and said, "I need to have this counted," and then, deposit into his personal account. Well, just so happened there was an IRS agent or an IRS, I don't know if he's an agent, but an IRS representative at the bank that day. And the teller went to the manager went to the IRS, and they're like, "This just doesn't sound right because this DEA never does it this way." And so they started an investigation. He ended up going to prison, which is where he should have been because he stepped over that thin blue line to the bad side. Lost his career. His wife lost her career. Now he's a convicted criminal, convicted felon. It was horrible. And he was involved in one of the highest profile cases that DEA has ever participated in. And I'm just not going to say it because I don't want to get sued over it.
Yeah, it's funny because in the movie that came out in the early 1980s, Extreme Prejudice, the drug trafficker,
Nick Nolte. Yeah,
says to Nick Nolte, "Why don't you just come work with me?" And Nick Nolte says, "You can buy me. You could always buy me, but you can't buy the badge. And one without the other ain't no damn good."
One of my favorite lines from that movie, and that was Michael. I'm trying to think the other guy. Always kind of played a bad guy, kind of bald
Powers
head.
Booth.
Yeah, and just that was a great movie too because I love that line because Nick Nolte, you'd look at him, think him in 48 Hours and stuff, kind of as a buffoon and stuff. But in that, I love that movie because I thought it was really raw and authentic. And that was a good one. Murph, I think we just have an idea maybe for our narco meter. We might do a Nick Nolte.
I'm writing it down right now.
Great minds think alike. Thanks for the inspiration, Michael.
Well, it's funny because you talk about buffoon. As I said, I'm married to an amazing woman, and she knows.
You said that because you said buffoon.
Well, I mean, speaking of buffoons, I'm married to my wife.
What I mean is this. No. I love her to death. What I mean is this: is that she's heard all these high-speed things I've done, yet she sees me fumble around the house looking for reading glasses and tripping on carpet and stuff, and she's like, "We don't know if you're James Bond or you're Mr. Magoo."
Inspector Clouseau.
So the name that they coined on me is Bond Goo because they don't know if I'm Bond or if I'm Magoo. So, she's heard all these stories, but she's seen the older version of me, which is this dithering, moron. And so, yeah,
that's
I'm Bond
a good lady.
Goo.
That's a good sense of humor right there.
Oh, but that's the reality of it, though, is that you're faced with all these challenges, and I like what you said. It's how you exit out of it. Can you maintain? Because the other thing too, a lot of pressures, a lot of guys, not just because they're facing criminal action, but home life, divorces,
alcoholism,
drug dependency,
drug use.
Yeah. And it's a tough business, and in an area where it's one thing if you're only presented with it every now and then. Maybe you're in a lower crime area, maybe you're in a slower speed, somewhere else, slower way of life.
We had,
but when you're
so many targets,
hit at it all the time. That's what I'm saying. You're hit it all the time.
We had cases we couldn't work because we were too busy working other cases. We had so many targets, and we were also working a lot. I was personally working a lot in New York and Los Angeles as well as Miami. So we were doing pickups and drops in other cities outside of South Florida. So it was a very fast-paced time for 10 years, yeah.
That's what we used to say. If you could make a drug case in South Florida, you need to go get another job because it was washing up on the beaches. It was falling out of the skies. Everybody was flipping on everybody else.
Well, that's what Luis Navia was saying, that they had, what was that one place? He was talking to the customs agent. There was a lighthouse there. That was just like a target. You'd come by, that was your target. You'd come by, you'd drop the coke, right there, and then you'd fly off.
That would be Key Biscayne, and because it's a national park, they realized there's probably no park ranger there at night. And on the other side of that is a little saddle-like harbor. Would be a good pickup spot. Yeah.
Just amazing. So, but I know we're going to talk about some other stuff too, but you did this for 10 years. Give us an idea of, you started going to New York and LA. You mentioned things like Medellin cartel. What are some of the other activities you engaged in during that time that went to that got you out of Coral Gables? There was a nexus there, but got you onto the national stage. I mean, was it just strictly, were you involved in money laundering? Because that is your site. Just so folks know, you can go to money launderer or moneylaundering.com.
No, I'm laundering money.
Laundering money.
Money laundering is
money.
ACAMS. I'm launderingmoney.com.
Launderingmoney.com. Laundering money. Hey, did
And
you
I'm
ever
also
know
michaelhearns.com.
Michael Hearns, which I have your author site up here too.
We're
with
going to
your
post
books.
all that for you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, did you ever know a guy named Ken Ryjock?
Yeah, let me tell you about Ken. Let me tell you about Ken.
He's a former guest on the show, by the way.
Ken, all right, I told you about my wife, and my wife lived in, I don't want to say where Ken lived, although Ken's told many people where he lived. Ken and my wife, when I started dating her, lived in the same building. And so I would see him in the parking garage
No shit.
all the time. And he didn't know who I was, but I knew who he was. And I didn't want to like freak him out, because, and so we'd get in the elevator, and it was a beautiful building in Miami, and in a beautiful part of Miami. And we'd go back and forth. And now he sent me his book a couple weeks ago. We connected, and then I sent him my first Cade Taylor novel. I signed it, and I wrote in it what I just said to you guys. We live to tell. We live to tell the stories. He's a good guy. I mean, he did his thing. Ken's forte is he has a law background.
Yep.
But you'd be surprised how much a little bit of knowledge of law really goes in your favor. And if I don't know where we are in our timeline, I'd love to tell you a story if I can.
Oh, you can tell us anytime. Just for folks to know too, that was episode 14 with Ken Ryjock. Came out in November of 2021. Yeah, he was one of the first bulk cash smugglers, and he had an interesting background from Vietnam, to what he's doing now. But no, go ahead. The advantage of a podcast is we don't have to do things sequentially. We can bounce around if we want to, and if you got a great story, let's hear it.
When we would get information, there might be a large amount of currency or drugs in the house, mostly currency. We would sometimes try and do a consent search. You guys oftentimes refer to that as knock and announce. And I was very good at getting into houses and talking to people. And I had some really good CIs. And I had CIs that were cabinet members in other countries. They were regular Joe Schmoes in Miami. But I had some really good CIs. So we would oftentimes go to a house and attempt to get a consent search. And if we weren't able to get consent search, we would go and, based on that information, go get a warrant. And back in that time frame, warrants took a long time to be written. It took about 3.5 hours to be written, and they have to be exact. The house faces northwest. It's white with a blue trim. It has an asphalt roof. The numbers are 3916 east on the east side of the door, and you have to have all that detail. So half of the team would go back to get the warrant written, and the other half would stay at the house, and I would oftentimes stay at the house. No one's going in, no one's going out. And some attorney would show up invariably that the cartel, that the Medellin or Cali cartel had on retainer. And they may pay this guy $80,000 or $90,000 a year just in case they ever need him. So this guy would show up, and he wouldn't even know who his client is. He'd be looking around. He'd be like, "Are you Mr. Garcia? Mr. Garcia? You're Mr. Garcia. Hi, I'm your attorney." And so for like 3 hours, he would just berate me about how the good citizens of Coral Gables are wasting their time, energy, and money on having me as an employee, how he can't believe that I would go on this fishing expedition, that I must be prejudicial against other people because I'm out here harassing his client. Don't I have better things to do? Just for 3 hours, he's trying to show the client that he's doing this job. So when the warrant would come, I'd get the warrant. I'd step inside the house. I'd turn around. I say to him, listen, I'm really new at this. I've never done this before. Are you sure you're okay with this? He would step in, look at the warrant, say, yes, yes, yes. You guys must have these judges in your back pocket. I don't know how you got this signed. Or I'd step in, hold my cell phone up, and go, why is your office calling my phone? And he would look at me. I go, this is, I'd use a few choice words. Whoever it is, get
We're
off
family
the
friendly.
Yeah, and I'd put the phone down, and he'd come in and get the phone. So now we have to go, after we might seize, say, $300,000 now. So now we have to go to what's known as an adversarial hearing, or in the 10-day rule, which means we have to go in front of a judge in chambers with legal counsel and explain to the judge why this currency belongs to Coral Gables and not to Mr. Garcia. So I would be in chambers with the judge. It'd be our task force attorney, it'd be Mr. Garcia, and it'd be the attorney that showed up on the scene. And they would say, okay, we're here to discuss $300,000 found at such and such an address in Miami-Dade County on this such and such a date. With us is attorney so-and-so, Detective Michael Hearns is here. With us also is Mr. Garcia and his attorney. So, Detective Hearns, tell me how you came to be at this house on that day. And the first thing I would say to the judge is, Your Honor, I want to invoke the rule. And the judge would look at me, oftentimes take his glasses off and rub them and start laughing and go, son, there's no rule to invoke here. And I go, yes, there is, Your Honor, because that man right there, and I'd point at the attorney, was inside the house when we searched the house. He's a witness to our search. He's the first witness I'm going to call. And the judge would go, you were in the house when you were searching? Yes, sir, Your Honor. He came in and picked up my cell phone for some reason off the front foyer. Yes, Your Honor. He came in to discuss the warrant with me inside the house while our team was searching. He's a witness to our search. He's our witness. He's now an attorney. He's a witness. Gavel would come down. Judge would tell Mr. Garcia, you have 5 days to get new legal counsel. And I would kill two birds with one stone. That guy would no longer be an attorney for the cartel. Garcia would never get an attorney in 5 days. I did that to 7 different attorneys in Miami in my career. 7.
Oh, it's fantastic.
And so Ken has all the legal lawyer lifestyle behind him, but a little bit of legal knowledge goes a long way.
Yeah. That's funny.
Hey,
And
now,
you gotta understand, I mean, some of those attorneys in South Florida were so freaking obnoxious.
Slimy.
Oh, yeah. Just greasy.
Never on retainer,
about,
and they were just, trying to, and I got them discredited. The cartel will never use them again, and we were able to make our seizures.
Good job.
Now, other than running into Ken Ryjock like that, did you ever have an official interaction with Ken or an investigation, or was that just more passing him in the hallway?
2 gunslingers, just 2 old gunslingers, living in a building that we probably both don't deserve to be in. Just.
But this is when we talk about small world. We were having some conversations during a quick break, a pause, and just the names. But then you realize too, a guest we had on a year and a half ago, just to know that you walked past him in the hallway. I mean, you talk about a small world. I mean, well, that's used to be everybody's related by 6 degrees of separation. I think when you get into the world of law enforcement and crime, we're all related by 3 degrees of separation. If I don't know somebody, Murph knows him. And if Murph doesn't, I do. Or we're one or at most 2 phone calls away.
I joke that I'm the Forrest Gump of law enforcement because I actually did a money pickup with Joe Pistone. At the very, very back end of his career, he was very good friends with, I don't want to say who it is because he's still good friends with that guy. And this guy's in law enforcement, and he brought Joe out for this deal. And I'm sitting in my car, and the guy pulls up next to me and goes, hey, you ready for this thing to go? I go, yeah. He goes, say hi to Joe. And this guy leans over and goes, how you doing? And I go, how you doing? And, there it is. And I heard your podcast with him, and you're absolutely right. The hat and the glasses is it's like, it's all the time.
And that was episode 73 for those of you.
And a good one
how many episodes have we had a connection to already? I mean,
it's South Florida. Steve's going to tell you, South Florida, it's like everybody gets there at some point, and there's some sort of rubbing of shoulders at some point, and everybody.
It's like the McDonald's of law enforcement and drug dealing. Everybody works there or passes through there most likely at one point.
Well, it was funny when I was in Miami, January, February, maybe March. All the New York and Boston agents wanted to run their cases out of Miami to get out of that cold weather and come down and enjoy the sun and the surf.
I used to love to go to those briefings, and like I'd be sitting there and I'd go, okay, Mike, you'll be the UC and Alex will be the other UC. And then the DEA guy go, how come I don't never get no cases down here? And it's like, because you sound like you fell off a milk truck in the middle of Manhattan. That's why, you know?
Exactly. You're exactly right.
What are these two youths doing
guys,
on the beach
I'm telling you, these guys, they do all the time. This is bullshit. I'm telling you, this is supreme bullshit.
Yep. It was funny. The first time you go through it, and I'm just a young agent, and you look at this guy's like, well, if you don't like it, take your ass back up north. But then you see what's going on, you get to know the guys, and it's funny.
I had the opposite. I had to do a lot of pickups in New York in the winter, and I remember being in DEA headquarters in New York, and I had to use the restroom, and so I'm walking past all these cubicles, and they're all got all the police memorabilia on these cubicles and glory shots and things. And I go by this one cubicle, and it's just got nothing but pictures of Miami. And so on the way out of the bathroom, there's this very young agent in there. And I look at him and I go, hey, you from Miami? He goes, yeah. I go, I'm from Coral Gables. I'm up here doing a deal. And he goes, and he just like wistfully looked up into the sky like, man, I wish I could be back there. And then, just to be the jackass I am, I'm like, yeah, when we're done, we're flying back tonight. Yeah.
Back where you don't need a coat, back where you don't need a parka, back where you don't have to worry about the subways.
Man. Yeah.
Back where, we can, for our listeners, we can see each other on video. We only release the audio portion of these interviews, but I see Mike here. He's in a short sleeve shirt, and I'm pretty sure he's in shorts, and I am too. And we're looking at Morgan, and he's got his long sleeve jacket on, his hat. It looks like he's got earmuffs on, probably his little mittens.
Those are called headphones, Steve. Headphones. And this is my Secret Service one, dude. I got that when I ran the Republican National Convention back in 2012. So I've got to visit the Secret Service store. So when it's at biting ass cold, like it was this morning when I got up, 25 degrees. Which I've had colder, but as you get older, it's like, no, my set point starts raising, man. So, I got to dress warm.
I actually authored our mutual aid agreement with the Vermont Drug Task Force and had to go to Vermont and work cases coming across the Derby line into Rouse's Point with RCMP. Because I had that time in Connecticut, I've spent a lot of time in cold weather. I'm not a fan. I mean, I am like, put me in about 4 inches of water in a sandbar with something cold in my hand and just watching the sun go. That's heaven for me.
Life is good.
Yeah. And I'm so lucky. I basically saw salt water like almost every day of my life and was in it, saw it, got near it, and we don't recognize that, your body is composed of water and minerals, and there's a lot of salt in you and there's a lot of water in you. And this is what draws us. And the lure of the ocean is very strong. And if you were raised or around it a good portion of your life, you will never, ever feel comfortable being in an area, whether you can't see it or be near it. You just won't.
Speaking of Vermont, I went up there one time for a speaking gig, and I remember I had to drive about an hour to get to where I was going. I stopped. I wanted someplace to eat, found a nice good little country store or whatever, and I go in there, and of course Vermont's got all the maple trees, and everything, and there's this shirt there with a picture of a huge maple tree, and it goes, yeah, I'd tap that.
I like that.
Yeah, it was a good sense of humor. Hey, let's talk about this though. So you did a lot of this undercover work for 10 years, but a lot of this was related to drug trafficking, but at some point did it start relating to terrorism?
I was always telling our team that the money we were seizing, it represents a lot of things. It represents destabilized economies. It represents political campaigns that are being highly funded. It represents a lot of anguish and a lot of turmoil. And it also represents the funding of terrorism. It was easy for those in the group who just focused on cocaine to think only of, and you always heard the same thing, Colombia. But the reality of it is, as Steve will tell you, your better coca grows in Bolivia and Peru in the Chapare Valley. It's really, the Colombians had an amazing economic model. They controlled their product that they didn't really harvest, and they sold it in a market that they didn't really have to be a part of, and they had to repatriate it back to them as either American currency or pesos. It was an incredible business model when you really look at it. They were not, the cartels are oftentimes portrayed as being less than intelligent, and don't ever fool yourself with that, man. They have some of the brightest people, some of the biggest accounting minds, some people who are ex-law enforcement, current law enforcement, ex-military, all working for them. This is a billion dollar a year, multi-billion a year industry, and they didn't get this way by luck, and there is propensity for the currency to fund terrorism. And it was in the very back end of my career that I started to think of it in that respect. And then I was out of it around 99. And then, of course, 9/11 occurred in 2001. And in my teaching, when I was teaching a lot of AML, anti-money laundering, I started bringing in the terrorism aspect to it and showing people how the currency can be used for terrorism.
Did you get into other groups besides the Colombians, Hamas and the different groups over the Middle East?
A lot of people don't realize that Hamas has a big presence in South America and what we call the Triangle, which is down near Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. It's a very, very dangerous part of the world right now. And there is a big Hamas presence in South America. People don't know that. They oftentimes think it's just, one or the other. And we do that with our entertainment, with our television. We readily identify the bad guy and the good guy, but oftentimes there's a melding and a blending. And there's a Russian presence in South America as well. There's a lot of people don't seem to realize that. They think it's all just one ethnicity, or it's all one country, or it's all one region. It's not. I started teaching in the AML classes I teach. I do a lot of narco-terrorism as well. And we go into some of the different biggest currencies of the world. The first biggest currency is general money, meaning Apple computers, Ford Motor Company, Toyota. The second largest currency is drug trafficking. The third largest currency is grocery store coupons. So, those three things, and the grocery store coupons alone fund a lot of terrorism. So,
I was doing work at DOJ on information sharing post 9/11 after some DOD stuff. And a guy named Scott Sweetow was with ATF. And it really struck me when we started thinking about how the cases they were looking at, because you think of ATF as mostly like firearms and explosives. Well, they've got that T in there for tobacco. And that was one of the cases we talked about that we used as a use case for some of the stuff we were doing. You had terrorist groups over here, Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda type of affiliations. And what they were doing is getting cigarettes in bulk before the tax stamp was put on there, create a counterfeit tax stamp, put it on there, and then sell it and keep the difference between the tax stamp and the price that they paid for it wholesale. And that money, they were just making money hand over fist. And the case was made out of North Carolina. And you start thinking, to your point, about all the different ways money is exchanged. There's a system, an Arabic system called, hawalas, where you move money. Very hard to track that kind of stuff too. I mean, you think the dark web is tough, and it is. Hawalas are much tougher to track.
And Michael, hang on before we talk about hawalas. We've got a quick message from one of our news sponsors.
Game of Crimes is brought to you by BetterHelp. Now, Steve, this is a topic you and I have discussed many, many times, and we're not strangers to it. We've encouraged people to get help. And one of those things is that we've had many guests on our show who have gone through life-changing experience. I think of Joe Piersante being shot through the head, Lou Velosi, a lot of the stuff he went through. Many people who are at some of the darkest points in their life, and the one thing that brought them back, the one thing that helped them was getting help. It was getting therapy.
Right. There, we all have events in our life that will change what the norm is for us, to the point where sometimes you don't know what you want. You don't know why you're reacting the way you do. And that's where BetterHelp can come in to help you better connect with what's going on internally. Just to put it very bluntly, BetterHelp will connect you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery to find out what's going on and get you straightened out.
Yeah. And, a lot of what people need, it's like if you're going to build something, you want the right tools. When I'm working on a car, I want the right tools. Well, sometimes to work on yourself, to improve yourself, you don't know what you don't know. You need a new set of tools. You need a new way of looking at the problem. And so, it's about learning coping skills. And the other thing, too, in this day and age with so much stuff going on, it's about setting the right kind of boundaries for you, for your children, with friends. I mean, I set boundaries with you all the time. I say, quit calling me at 3:00 in the morning, but you still do.
Yeah, I don't listen to you very well. But so, you know what? If you're thinking of starting therapy, think about BetterHelp. Give it a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule, which is fantastic. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire. You get matched up with a licensed therapist. And you know what? As you're going through and meeting your therapist, if you're not connecting the way you think you should be, you can change therapists without any extra charge.
You know us, you've heard us, you've talked about, we always encourage people to go get help. So discover your potential with BetterHelp. So go visit BetterHelp.com/GOC to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/GOC.
Okay, Michael, let's get back in. Let's talk about some of the training you've done on Hawalas.
Yeah, I do a couple hours on Hawala. I do a couple hours on narcoterrorism. I do a couple hours on grocery store coupons. And I also do a couple hours, I do like an hour or two on tobacco. You don't even have to even go to that extent about the stamps. You can just buy the cigarettes a lot cheaper in North Carolina and Virginia and then just sell them on the black market in New York City and make money. And if a state trooper should ever pull you over, you don't have a contraband product in your car. Tobacco is legal. What you do with it,
smoking habit.
What you do with it in the back end is illegal. But as you are moving those cigarettes up to New York State to sell them, and they also get them off of a lot of the indigenous reservation areas of New York State and move them into New York City. The counterfeit goods, all those purses and wallets you buy on Canal Street down there in New York City, all that money gets repatriated back to a lot of terrorism groups and things. Yeah, and the thing about the coupons, I don't know if you ever had a guest talk to you about coupons or if you're up on it, but
first time we've heard coupons used on our podcast.
Oh, yep. Well, coupons basically, the terrorist groups will employ people who are behind the power curve. It could be elderly people on fixed incomes, college students struggling for money, single parents, and they have them clip a bunch of coupons, and then they control some of these small markets and bodegas in the parts of New York and New Jersey and St. Louis and Chicago and stuff like that. And then those coupons go to these markets, and the markets send them off to be redeemed. And they can only be redeemed through a coupon clearinghouse. And the largest coupon clearinghouse is AC Nielsen. So what happens is AC Nielsen says, okay, we just sold all this product. We got to send the money back on the coupon. So they get a certified check back. And then the market turns that check over and it gets put into a terrorist bank. So what the only enforcement part of that is if AC Nielsen hires their own people or the Secret Service. So what they'll do sometimes is they'll sometimes create a phony product. That's why you'll see, like in your Sunday circular, in your Miami Herald or your New York Times or a newspaper you get, you'll see a product and you want to go buy it and you can't find it on the shelf. It's because it doesn't exist. And every time that coupon gets redeemed, they know that's part of the network that's fraudulently using the coupons. And they oftentimes will adulterate like baby formula because babies can't tell you it tastes bad. So they'll counterfeit that. They'll counterfeit other things, and they make a lot of product off of that. And actually, the first bombing of the trade towers in New York is funded from coupons.
The
No
1993 bombing?
Yeah. They all went to a video store in Brooklyn, and a guy named Ivan the Red was the one of the enforcers on that. But I'm trying to remember the sheik. He was blind. I can't remember his name.
The blind sheik, Omar.
He went to
something or other,
Butner Correctional in North Carolina. He was the head mastermind behind that, and all the money came from grocery store coupons. So you collect all these coupons, you steal the circulars off the loading dock at the printing press, you steal them out of newspaper recycling bins, and you cut them out, and then you have a phony, you have a fraudulent storefront redeem them, and then you recoup the currency. So grocery store coupons account for about $200 million a year.
Wow. That was the blind sheik was Omar Abdel Rahman, who has now assumed room temperature back in 2017, which is good for him.
Yep.
I remember that too. And another interesting thing too, and we dog on the FBI every now and then. It's a state law in Virginia. We have to make fun of them at least once per episode. But what I give them credit for is the way they caught the guys too on that first trade tower. They searched the stuff. You come up with the VIN, like they did Oklahoma City bombing. Very meticulous. We had Ed Davis on from the Boston Marathon bombing, and just talked about how meticulous they were at collecting all of these different parts. And then you know what the morons did, Murph? I don't know if you know this part.
Yeah, I know.
They reported the truck stolen, then tried to come back and get out of paying the contract on the rental vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any way they can.
Oh, hey, so. Go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say, it's amazing. These criminal groups, for our listeners that are not aware, don't think that they are just stereotyped or stovepiped into one crime. It's wherever they can make money. I mean, making money off a baby formula? Holy cow. And the coupons, I never heard of
because the babies can't complain. They can't tell you it tastes bad. So that's one of the ones they do. I'm trying to think of some of the others that they've done. It was actually a pretty strong group out of St. Louis that was doing all this. And what happened was they had a wire up, and the head guy of the group was angry at his daughter for who she was dating, and he killed his daughter, and they heard it on the wire. So they had to, in discovery, it came out that he and his cohorts were being investigated. So the group went underground for a while and resurfaced up in Minneapolis and resurfaced in Chicago. And then all that money went towards New York. And then that's how they funded the trade tower first bombing. And like we were just talking about, the VIN off the chassis or something, they found a piece of it and they were able to track it to the U-Haul truck.
Yeah, thank goodness. And the other thing, we did episode 34 with Aaron Graham, one of Steve's buddies, former DEA, but you talk about counterfeit baby formula, counterfeit products. Aaron works for a large pharmaceutical company, and we had a fantastic discussion about all the stuff. There's no such thing as a Canadian pharmacy, so people don't do that. And if you have any questions, go to pharmacy.safe, and that's where you can look up a lot of that different stuff. So, but let's talk. You did this for 10 years. Was it time to move on, or what circumstances changed where you said, okay, enough, 10 years of undercover? Because, it's not an easy life. I don't want to say you're constantly paranoid, but you're constantly paranoid to a certain extent. What finally said for you, hey, 10 years is enough, before you moved on to something else?
It was a combination of a couple things. We had a change in leadership in the department, and we had also had a large change in the tactics and the way we were doing things. We had been originally in the early 1990s, late 1980s, we were with Operation Greenback with U.S. Customs. And then we worked multiple operations, Operation Wizard, Operation Casacom, Polar Cap, and then Bill Clinton was elected president. And he had Janet Reno, former Miami-Dade state attorney, as attorney general. And she felt that money pickups and money deals were unethical. So she started to clamp down on customs and IRS on doing pickups and drops. And we had a lot of cases in the pipeline. We had a lot of informants. We had a lot of things going on. So we went to the Justice Department, the DEA, and we created a state-run task force that has special dispensation from the Justice Department to operate. And under that auspiciousness, we kept going full steam ahead. But in doing so, we had to bring in more agencies, and that brought in more people. And not everybody who was brought in was of the caliber of people you wanted to be doing this type of stuff. And it got to the point where I felt that we were becoming not so much a part of the solution as more of a part of the problem. We became very large and unwieldy, and we started having, fractions started happening and stuff. And like I said, we had a change in leadership in our agency, and it just became a culmination of it's time to go. It's time they want you to go. It's time I need to go, And it just was like, it was just a natural migration of, okay, this has been good. 10 years is a long time. It's a long time. And my signature, Coral Gables was the host agency of this task force. So I was the Gables detached person to the task force. So my signature was on every seizure. And I remember towards the very, very end going in for a deposition, and the stenographer was running late. And it was just me and the attorney in the conference room. And he's trying to engage me in small talk, and I didn't really want to deal too much with him. And I dealt with him in times past. He was definitely a cartel attorney. And I said to him, his name is, he's dead now. And I said to him, hey, Miguel, what's our reputation down south? Meaning, what does the cartel think about us? And his response was he leaned on the table and he got real close to me. He goes, I can tell you one thing. They don't like you. They know who you are and they don't like you, but you play the game fair. And that wasn't like the impetus or igniter to leave, but it was like, I've been doing it for 10 years. And there were times when we'd make a seizure at 11 p.m. and at 8:30 a.m. the next morning, my paperwork was being handed to me by my CI that had been faxed from Colombia. Hey, how did this happen? So I spent my entire career let me rephrase that. I spent my entire undercover years. I never got myself or anybody on my team hurt or killed, and never got an informant hurt or killed. And it was just, you're rolling the dice, and now it's just time to move on, And when he said that, it was like, they know who you are, but you play the game fair. So
that's not a comfortable feeling.
No, I'm sure it's one that I know you are intimately aware of. You could take all the precautions you can, but somebody somewhere, something is going to illuminate you, so.
Muted. There I go again. I was trying to keep from hacking or coughing. By the way, I was gone 5 days, San Diego, ran into a good friend of ours that Steve and I have, Mel Souza, runs the Southern California Gang Conference. I'm only back for 2 days and I got to go to LA, Orange County. So I'm like, my mind's, I'm still recovering. But what I was saying is that, they only got to get lucky once doing that. Right. During that time, though, that you were undercover and doing work, was there any instance where you look back on it now and you go, either that was somebody doing surveillance or, somebody following me or anything like that? Did anything stick out to you as you look back at, reflectively and go, yeah, that was probably them?
No, not exactly. I cleaned myself a lot. My first wife used to get very angry because I would never take a direct route home. I would always be, and like if I saw a car on our street that I didn't recognize, I would just drive right by my house and keep going. I took a lot of precautions in a lot of ways, and in our offsite, we never ever walked in with gear on or raid jackets or anything like that. In fact, we never wore raid jackets because we had pennies, like athletic pennies, that we would just roll over that said, U.S. Customs, DEA on them. The raid jackets oftentimes inhibit your ability to reach your weapon. And in South Florida, they're a lot cooler than the raid jackets. So I didn't walk into buildings with radios and gear and badges and guns and things like that. And I definitely didn't look nor act like I was in law enforcement. I think a lot of that is because I didn't have a lot of time per se in uniform. And I remember when I came out of Vin and I had shaved and cut my hair and took out the earrings and stuff, and walking through my building, and the elevator opens up, and the secretary from the detective division is in the elevator with another woman, and she looks at me and she goes, "Michael, oh my God, you look so different." I said, "Oh, hey, nice to see you." And then as the doors were closing, I hear her say to the other woman, "He was so scuzzy before." And, it's like, so no, but I never had any counter surveillance. I never had anybody leave a dead fish at my front door or something like that. No.
Well, and our listeners might be thinking, well, man, he's really paranoid. Well, if you see that unusual car out there, maybe it is, maybe it's not. But the bottom line is, we're talking to you today, all these years later.
Yeah. I mean, it's money. It's, people die for a lot less than what we were seizing every day, and just regular robbery, stick up holdups,
It's just terrible. I mean, stealing an iPhone, they want your sneak. I remember when the Air Jordans came out, there's a new movie coming out about Air Jordans, and then people were getting robbed when the new Air Jordans came out. I mean, it's the devaluation of life.
Yeah. The big circle. You kill the cow to make the shoe, and then you kill the man to get the shoe.
Yeah.
Well, and these dopers, what's their bottom line? Why are they in this business? They want the money. That's the bottom line. They don't give a shit about the dope. That's why they want to move it as quickly as they can. It's
dope is a commodity to get to the money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's useless if it doesn't generate income.
Yep.
And that's why I like what you were talking about too. If you want to, I mean, you can take their dope; they'll just make more dope. But you take their money, you can't unless you'd want to counterfeit. But you can't print money at that
when
scale.
When you seize the currency, you negate the bribery, you negate the transportation, you negate the coca labs, you negate the storage, you negate the wholesaler, the retailer, you negate all of them when you take the money.
Before we move on, after the 10 years, you mentioned, I was actually going to ask you about this, and thank you for bringing it up. When you were doing UC, describe, if you want to tell us what UC named you use or what you did, but describe, how did Michael Hearns look when you were working UC? What was your look?
Well, my hair was not the color it is now. I earned my white hair and I earned my wrinkles. Kind of, very long black hair, goatee, beard, earrings. I've got pictures. I could show you later on. Your listeners won't be able to see it, but
well, we'll put it up on our webpage. We'll post some pictures.
I'll send you a UC picture.
Yeah.
I'll send you a UC picture. It was just a different time. Some of my partners stayed in a very clean cut look, and it worked for them. This kind of worked for me.
Before we move on to one other question, you talked about your youth, back when you were a youth and watching all this stuff. Did any of the kids, other than the good ones we talk about, but did anybody from your childhood end up being a target of your investigation, or you arrested later?
No. And I was really good about recognizing that people like Steve were out there, and if Steve wants to go get them, he can go get them. There were enough people out there that I didn't need to go hunt in my own backyard. And quite literally, in my first house in South Florida, you could smell marijuana at night wafting. I lived in a very, very nice part of Miami. Large tropical fruit trees, swimming pool, yard, koi pond, whole 9 yards. And the guy behind me was a retired Pan American avionics engineer, and he was pretty good horticulturist too. And he had all kinds of flowering plants and loofahs and things growing on the fence between us. And when I moved into the house, I wanted to keep my undercover persona, not really talk to my neighbors, tell my neighbors what I do. And the realtor told all the neighbors who I was. So before I got the first box off the moving truck, I heard, "Hey, I heard you're undercover from Coral Gables. Nice to meet you." I'm like, "Oh man."
Nice.
So I'm smelling this marijuana repeatedly for a couple months, and I've gotten to know the neighbor in the back. And he's just a guy at the fence line. It's almost like that Tim Allen TV show where you're talking to the guy with the fence line,
You only see him from like the nose up
exactly
or
like
above
this.
the nose. Yeah.
He's a great guy too, by the way. And so his name is Joe, and he's passed on, so I can say his first name. So I said, "Hey, Joe, you know what I do, right?" He goes, "Oh, yeah. I go, "No, Joe, I work really large, high volume cocaine and money laundering cases. So if you want to smoke a doob in the backyard, I'm not going to jump over the fence and come after you." And he goes, "Oh my God, thank goodness. I've been blowing it into a peanut butter jar every night." And he basically grew his own. And when, my stance on that is if you grow your own and you're not bringing commerce into it, you're not going into a neighborhood you don't belong in to buy it or sell it, and you're not. If this is your afternoon cocktail, then you do your thing. I'm not going to jump over the fence and come after you. So no, I didn't go after people I knew, and I kind of stayed away from my old neighborhood. And then when I came back, on to a social scene or a wedding or a bar or something, I would oftentimes see people and they would look at me and they'd be like, "We haven't seen you in 10 years. And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't really come around that much anymore." And like their children would be like 10 or 12 or 14 years old and they'd see me and they go, "You're Mike Hearns. I heard all about you." And I'm like, "Yeah, I've never seen you, but I've heard about you." I go, "Well, yeah, that's tell your dad I said hi."
Hey, now, did you ever run into one of your bad guys from before when you were UC, once you'd cleaned up? And did you ever run into them and either they didn't recognize you or they had to take a long look at you to figure out? We had some guys, the reason I say we had some guys work UC, and when they came back to work in the street and cut their hair and cleaned up and everything, one guy one night is talking to this dude that we had put in jail together. I was part of it, but he didn't. He says, "Who's the other guy?" I said, "You never met him before?" He goes, "No." Oh, okay. Did you ever have any of those?
I didn't have that. What I did have is right after leaving, I went to a Home Depot one afternoon to get something, and this individual, who I'll make an assumption was Colombian, I was wearing a baseball hat. It looked at me, and I started walking to Home Depot. He started following me, and I knew that he was there to do a drop, and all he knew is that the target was going to be wearing a hat. So I turned around and I said, "Do you have something for me?" And he nodded his head up and down and said, "Okay." And we started to walk out, and then he realized that I was not the guy he's supposed to drop to, and he took off running. So, I almost had my own drop right there because I'm wearing
throwdown
and
case,
I'm walking in. I'm going. I'm out of the device narcotic world about a month and a half now. I'm like, God dang it! This is like it follows you. Like, I must have a
You're
look on me or something.
You're a drug magnet. That's a whole lot better than being a bullet magnet
or shit magnet. Really?
Yeah. See, that was me. I couldn't work UC because my only UC role, my only one time was working with our DEA task force on our guys. I was the banker. I put a shirt on and a tie and opened up the bank's the safety deposit box with the money in it. Because otherwise, I looked like a cop. I could never blend in like you guys. I was just too much to look. So no UC career for me other than Tommy Bahama. I have a fantastic career as an undercover Tommy Bahama,
They should hire you as a spokesman. They're international spokesman.
I think it's also a mindset. If you don't really I didn't socialize with a lot of people in my agency, and I didn't socialize with a lot of other officers. Like I said earlier, the friends I had as a child are the friends I still had. I just didn't. I didn't look at myself in that respect.
Well, let's talk about post undercover vice narcotics, and you've got to come back into the mainstream world of law enforcement. But you start getting involved with things like serial crimes and homicide. So how did you go from, just kind of should tell us, how did you go from working vice narcotics? Now you're doing homicides and things like that.
Well, we had, and it's still an open case. I can't talk too much about it, but we had a situation where we felt we had a serial murderer come through Coral Gables. It wasn't so much that he did anything in Coral Gables, but our agency had an interaction with him, and he seemed to. I'm really trying to not cheat you or your listeners, but I can't talk too much about it. It's just that he seemed to have a lot of things that made him number one on the radar, that this guy's done some bad things. And so, as Steve will tell you, sometimes in the narcotic world, you're working off doper time, and you could be gone and busy for 3 days straight, or you could have 3 days of total, hey, Johnny's going to go hit some golf balls. We'll call him if we need him. I mean, we got nothing going on. So when I had the downtime, I would start working this case. And I started working very closely with a forensic psychologist from Vermont. And this psychologist, Dr. John Philpin, became a friend and a mentor. And he was the criminal profiler brought in for the Gainesville murders in 1990 with Danny Rollin. And he's worked a lot of high-profile cases. So through his tutelage, I started putting this case together and working this case. And then the agency, the Gables, recognized that I had an affinity for this. So we had, while I was undercover still, a serial murderer in Miami called the Tamiami Strangler. And he had killed, I think, 6 prostitutes. And on the third one, he wrote a message to us on the victim's body, telling us that this is number 3, So the Gables saw that we were in a lull in what we were doing, and they detached me to Miami-Dade homicide. And through my actions and my workings with Dr. Philpin, I started drawing up the profile for this case. And in doing so, I put together like a 32-item criminal profile on the serial murderer that we had named the Tamiami Strangler, because he was killing these prostitutes and leaving them along the Tamiami Trail, which is a road in Miami. And the murderer, when he was captured, his name is Rory Conde. He's now on death row in Florida. But he hit on 31 of the 32 parts of the profile, so much so that while we were working the case, we had 2 factions working the case. Miami-Dade, because the bodies were being discovered in Miami-Dade, but the prostitutes were last being seen in the city of Miami. So the city of Miami had a task force. That's where I was. And then Miami-Dade had their homicide. So I was straddling the line with the 2 of them. So one morning, they say to me, "Can you meet this FBI profiler at a restaurant for breakfast?" And we were out all night working these cases. So I go to this restaurant, and I don't want to say who the agent is because he's still with the Bureau, and he's very, very, he's very good at what he does, and he's very, very, very high in the Bureau chain now. So the agent sits across the table from me, and he's like, "We went through our files at Quantico, and we don't see that you went to any of our classes." And I said, "No, I haven't been to your classes." "Well, we're just kind of curious how you know so much if you haven't been to our classes." And I said, "Well, the FBI typology for serial homicide is based on 33 incarcerated criminals. What John Douglas and Ressler and Hazelwood and Burgess did is not always super scientific. And you know what? Before we go on, if you want the guy at the counter and the guy by the door to join us, you just tell them to come over, because I know you're not here by yourself, and those 2 guys are over there. So you tell your other fellow agents to come join us here at the booth." And he got really embarrassed because they had a team inside the restaurant, because they actually suspected me of being the killer because I knew so much. But what they didn't recognize is that, a lot of things with criminal profiling is basically suspending your own logic. And there's some math involved, believe it or not. There's some math involved. There's some other sciences involved. It's not an exact science, of course. We know that. And because they'd never seen or heard from me, they were a little startled. And then once they realized that, no, I am not the serial murderer, I actually am a real cop, they were kind of cool with it. And by the end of the investigation, just before we arrested the killer, they were working pretty much in tandem with me on that, and I was working in tandem with them. And so from there, it migrated and gravitated. And so the Gables would sometimes send me to City of Miami or Miami-Dade when they had a problem, serial burglar, serial murder, serial rapist. And cops are territorial. They don't want to see an outsider coming in, asking or telling them what to do. So I needed to bolster my credibility. So I went back to school and got a master's degree in investigative criminal psychology. And then I got accepted for a doctorate degree in the UK, studying under Dr. David Cantor at first University of Liverpool, and then I went to Huddersfield University. And the back and forth to England was such a tremendous imposition on the Coral Gables Police Department, on myself, on my family. The expense was incredible. The dollar versus the British pound, the VAT tax. And at my age, I figured, how much runway do I really have? So I ceased going for the doctorate and just stayed at the master's level. And have with Dr. Philpin, have worked on multiple cases and consulted on a few pretty big ones.
That's hilarious that the Bureau thought, well, so because you have not taken our classes, how could you do it? You must be the man.
Well, what's interesting is I don't know if you guys are familiar with VDOC, VIDOCQ.
Yeah.
Well,
the VIDOC Society is up here in Philly.
Yeah, I got asked to go to VDOC, and I would sit with Wrestler before he passed away. I would sit at the table with him, and we'd have some talks. And there are a couple schools of typologies. There's the Holmes method, which took the FBI typology to a different stratus, and then Dr. Cantor and Brett Turvey. All these people I studied under and studied with have added to these typologies. So I don't want to come across as a jack of all trades, master of none. But I found that my upbringing and just living in South Florida helped a lot with the vice narcotic years. And then once again, I started to work more to serial homicide.
You were talking about the Gainesville murders. A friend of mine retired as a captain at Gainesville, but when he was a patrol officer in 1990, he was one of the guys that responded to one of the murders.
Yeah, that was a bad scene in Alachua County in Gainesville. And, evil exists. There's evil in the world, and it comes in many forms.
You can't rationalize. There are some people that are just evil. You don't explain it away. Their evil exists, like you say. But one thing that came out of that, it actually was a program I ended up using later as a detective. We wanted to start getting a little bit more efficient about. We were doing searches, everything from whether it was homicides or drug cases. And they created a program. I forget the name of it, but it was basically a way to track leads, and that was developed and derived because of the Gainesville murders. And so we would be able to we'd collect evidence, we'd bring it in, we'd track leads, and we're able to track who the lead was assigned to. A lot of that came out of the work that was done by Gainesville.
Well, a lot of the things also actually, believe it or not, came out of retail. Like when you go into a CVS or something and they ask you to put in your zip code, they want to see how far you traveled to go to that retail physical store. And that's how they work their marketing programs around that. So using that same thing, Ken Rossmo out of Washington State, who's now down in Texas.
I know Kim. Yeah,
Kim's. He Dr. Cantor has a thing called the circle theory, and Kim Rossmo also does a lot of geoprofiling, and Kim's methodology is also based on distance. And then there's a decay distance of a crime scene. Like the crime scene can be fresh, and then as you get further out, the crime scene starts to decay. Yeah. I could probably match you book for book as we. So I was lucky and fortunate. The Gables sent me to some really good schools. I went to ritualistic crime scene school. I went to Santeria school and voodoo school and hoodoo school, and I was blessed. I was blessed and fortunate in many ways, and I took advantage of the opportunities that were given to me. And I say took advantage not in such a way that I became, a pig about it. I took advantage of it and then tried to put the information they provided to me back out to the agency to help the agency when they needed it.
We had Dave Reichert on, the Gary Ridgway, Green River Killer, and they did not, and it's just something I talked to Dave about later too, they did not really, they were not able, because I don't think it was really formed yet in terms of geographic profiling, but when they went back and looked historically at the cases in Gary Ridgway, and they looked at that distance decay, you would only go out to a certain distance, because otherwise you increase the risk of being caught, more things can go wrong. So there tends to be an area. When they went back and they looked at it, there were two hot spots. It's just amazing to look at that graph, his home and the Kenworth facility where he worked.
Yeah.
And it's people are creatures of habit.
Well, Dr. David Cantor has a circle theory, small space analysis theory, and he calls it the marauder and the commuter model. Is the killer a marauder or a commuter? Do they strike out from their home base, or do they strike near their home base? And with the small space analysis is based on Louis Guzman's facet theory from Israel, where you give every crime a numerical number, a slashing of the throat, an evisceration of the abdomen, gouging of the eye, wherever it may be, gets a numerical number. And as those victims start to correlate against each other, you see where those numbers fall in that diagram of the circle with a quadrant through it, and then you start to get a home base out of it. So I stopped short of saying it's scientific, but it has science influences.
Yeah, and if I remember right too, because I read a lot of David Cantor too, he was kind of originally started the geographic profiling, discipline, you might say. Kim Rossmo followed on because he was in Vancouver, actually worked with a buddy of mine that was up there. But what I thought was interesting, they also went back and looked because he had some relation to the Yorkshire Ripper case, right?
Yeah, David, I call him David. Dr. Cantor's actual background was in industrial psychology. And then he parlayed that into, as he looked not just at the Yorkshire, but also at Jack the Ripper himself. He looked at those cases, did a lot of research papers upon them, and then in the UK, he was called upon by Scotland Yard to do a lot of work. And then his work was also picked up by Eric Hickey out of San Diego and Kim Rossmo, as you mentioned, from the Pacific Northwest. I think he's at North Texas State, or he's at Sam Morgan State or something down there. These guys are revolutionary, and they're really good at what they do. I have nothing but respect and admiration. But I also, in my discussions with Dr. Cantor, I've also had conflict. And not in a challenging way, but, hey, we need to look at it like this too. And the thing I said to Dr. Cantor one time was, you from a position of academia have time. When you're in law enforcement and you have a serial murderer and you're hosting the Super Bowl in a week and a half, you got every city manager, every mayor, every police chief on your neck telling you to find this guy. It's a lot of pressure. We don't have the luxury in law enforcement of time sometimes. And that's something we don't get in law enforcement, is the luxury of Monday morning quarterbacking, analysis, paralysis by analysis, overthinking it. Sometimes you just got to go, hey, look, this is how it's going to have to be.
But that was such fascinating. When I went through the original VICAP training, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, I went to a 1-week course that was put on by Bill Peters on serial crime profiling. And Bill was one of the original members back in the day of the behavioral science unit, then became the investigative science unit. Now I think it's the behavior analysis unit.
Yes, correct.
I mean, Yeah, they've had so many iterations. All I know is that they're several levels deep, in the down there at Quantico. But
they're in the basement. They were at one time.
yeah, and but you think about, you look at Silence of the Lambs, and you think, first of all, I think Murph, we did review, I believe, Silence of the Lambs, and first of all, you're not pulling a rookie who doesn't even have their badge yet, hasn't even graduated, to go talk to one of the most dangerous criminals of all, Hannibal Lecter.
The author Thomas Harris lived in Miami Beach, so like Dr. Fopen and I were asked to look at BTK in Wichita. And BTK was very simple. I was kind of dismayed because he was cutting telephone lines in the 1970s. And that told me he knew about alarms. So there were only two alarm companies back then. One was called Brinks, and one was called Circle. And if you looked at the employee records and put them up against who's still living in the area, you basically had them. And that's what he did. He was an alarm installer when he first started committing his murders. And when you look also at the location of the victims, there is an outlier. Like you talked about Kim Rossmo's the Everett, Washington hotspots for Green River. All the hotspots are in one part of Wichita, and then there's one that's one house away from his own house. He killed the next door neighbor, basically. So,
Park City, Wichita. He was a guy out of my Kansas Highway Patrol class. Retired, is now the chief of police in Park City, and they've torn down his house. Nothing exists that belonged to Dennis
that
Schrader.
Happens a lot. They did that with Bob Berdella also in Kansas City. They did that a lot, and they need to, because evil.
You don't want it to become a shrine to people that they come
evil.
visit.
Evil is a lure, and it has an attraction to certain parts of the population who will go and see that. That's why every October Salem, Massachusetts is full of people. They all want to go there, even though it was a.
Well, we haven't burned a witch since the 16th century, but I suppose we could start again, that we know of. Yeah, but she's a witch. Monty Python reference there. She's a witch. So, hey, well, let's talk about now, because you've parlayed a lot of that. But as you were doing that, you had 27 years in. Was it just simply because of timing, and it was time, you had to do it to maximize retirement? Or over that time, did you get to the point where you think, hey, this is, I've accomplished everything I wanted to do? What went the decision for you to pull the pin to say, I'm done?
Well, like I said, we had a change in leadership, and the mentality was, when someone's doing something very well, it's oftentimes easy to think it's easy to do. So the mentality was, hey, let's give some other people a chance to do this, and you've done this a long time. The other mentality was there were individuals and cliques and things starting to form in the task force, which upon my leaving and the leaving of two or three other key people about a year or two later, the task force started to implode with some scandals and some other things that were happening. There just was a difference in the temperature, and it's a long time, and it just was time to go. By my hand and by their hand, it was just time to go. It's just been a long time.
Yeah, that's a lot of guys, especially once you retire, they ask you, how do you know when it's time to go? And it's hard to explain to anybody. You just have the feeling. I think I've done as much as I'm going to be able to accomplish in this law enforcement career. I was a cop for 38 years, and that's a long damn time.
Yeah. I don't know if I answered Morgan's question correctly. I thought he was talking about the VIN years, but if he's talking about my actual police career.
Yeah, no, I was both, because we talked about that too. Yeah, you had a change in leadership, but then you got 27 years in it. Year 27, how did you know it was time to go?
Steve hit the nail on the head. This is a young man's game.
It is.
I'm already
it really is.
Past retirement age. We like to think we have forever. And, your insurance agent will clearly tell you that based on amortization, the average male lives to be 74.4 years of age. And it's you have to recognize that there's more to life than that. And there's another horizon out there for you. And I work with plenty of guys and I'm saying guys meaning, just as a term, gender neutral. I worked with plenty of coworkers who, upon leaving our department, would say to me, now, if I get hired by this sheriff's office and I do 10 years with them, that's another 30%. And before I came to the Gables, I worked 4 years for the state as a toll collector. So if I could do 6 years at the state, I'll be 73. And it's like, buddy,
you got 1 year to live, statistically speaking.
And then you're going to backpack Italy? Are you out of your effing mind? It doesn't happen. I mean, Steve will tell you with his cane and his bad knee at the moment, things happen to you. You get old. And you have responsibilities too. You have children. You have spouses. You have elderly parents. There's things in your life you need to take care of. And it's just like I was fortunate. I could walk out the door at how old was I? I walked out the door like 52. No, not that young. I was like 50. Let's see. I don't know. Let's just say 56, 57. Stepped right into being a technical advisor on film and TV. I'm bouncing between Manhattan and Malibu and Miami, and it's just a whole new world. So it worked out really well. I mean,
you're talking about actuaries, and one of the things I love to needle, I ran into a couple actuaries because I said, you guys think you know everything. I said, if you really were good, I know you can tell me how many guys are going to die, what age they're going to be, what race they're going to be, probably what weight they're going to be, what occupation they're going to be, all this stuff. You can tell me everything about the what, where, how, and when. You guys, the minute you get down to telling me who, then you give me a call because we'll make some money together. They can tell you everything but who.
Yeah, but we don't have forever, and life is meant to be enjoyed. Not that the work any of the three of us did was not enjoyable, but we do know it was fraught with hardship. It was fraught with sacrifice. It was fraught with emotional tenacity. And it's time to not have to be that guy. You don't have to answer that phone at 4 a.m. You don't have to roll out of bed at 2:30 in the morning.
And not see your bed for 3, 4, depending on what cases you're working.
I fielded phone calls from CIs and bad guys at my father's hospital bed, my son's hospital bed. I mean, I got pulled away from a Father's Day brunch one time. I mean, all kinds of things, and you don't have to live that life anymore.
Yeah, Steve, who was it that was on the podcast? No, it's Pete Forcelli. Yeah, Pete Forcelli was talking about, he said, you should always be expected to give 100% of yourself to the job, but don't give 100% of your life to the job. And that was one of the lessons he learned,
Yeah, and then we discussed that's not really what happens, because when you're in it, you're in it.
Yeah. I mean, you're involved in that. Well, you were talking about, so let's talk now, Pete. You thank you for kind of seeding that commentary, because you're involved in a couple things. You recently started writing books in 2020. Your first one came out. You were doing film and stuff. So how did you transition from police work into the world of film, movie, and book writing?
It wasn't a grand plan. I was asked to be a technical advisor on a film, and
which film?
It hasn't been released yet. It was called Adam. It's about a serial killer. So some movies get made and they either don't get released or they get limited released, in the sense that for a film to be considered worthy of an Academy Award, it has to appear in a theater once in New York City and once in Los Angeles for a week. After that, you can take it away. But we forget sometimes that in parts of Indonesia and parts of India, parts of New Zealand, they're dying for content. And so films that you never see air down there somewhere. So I did this film called Adam, and from there, the director and such got to know me. So they had a second film coming out, and he asked me to go to Cornwall, New York, which is west of the Hudson. And on that shoot, I met the technical advisor who does a lot of products for Fox and NBC and ABC, and he's based in New York City. And he's so busy, he can't do it all. So he said to me, hey, they need me to go to Pittsburgh for this FBI procedural TV show. Can you do it for me? I said, sure. So as soon as we wrapped the movie in Cornwall, I went to Pittsburgh and worked on an ABC on on an NBC Universal TV show about the FBI, and I was a technical advisor for that one. And then I did something for A&E, and was at the American Film Market in Santa Monica, shaking hands, meeting people. Met some people who were doing a movie called The Cuban, which is not in the law enforcement sphere. It's more of a
It's not about a sandwich, is it?
no. It's a movie. It's a feel good movie about love and music. It's about a patient in a nursing home who has dementia, and a nurse starts to play music around him, and he becomes more animated and back to life a little bit. And they realize that he was once a very famous Cuban musician in pre-Castro. And it didn't look like it had a lot of legs to it, but I got behind the project, and then we signed Lou Gossett Jr. and a couple other big names to the project, and it did really well. And that's how it kind of started with the film and TV. I was spending a lot of time in New York, Manhattan. I spent some time in LA. I was fortunate enough that a friend of mine had a very, very large house in Malibu he wasn't using, and threw me the keys. And I was living in Malibu with Tom Petty for a next door neighbor, and just doing it.
Well, somebody's got to do it.
Somebody's
Well,
got to
good
do
thing
it.
you were living in that house. Otherwise, we wouldn't want you to live like a refugee.
Yeah, I know.
But thank you
I
very
would
much.
actually.
Oh,
He was a good guy, and he still. I still have him in my cell phone. I don't have the heart to take him out. I would hear him like every third or fourth night. You would hear him wafting over the hedge as he rehearsed in his back studio. He has studio in the back of his house, and he'd open the French doors, and I could hear him rehearsing and trying riffs and things over the hedge at night.
Cool.
Yeah, blessed. I've been incredibly fortunate in my life. Really super. I've had such amazing experiences and stuff like that. You know.
Well, what about your book series now, the Cade Taylor book series? How'd you get into that?
Well, the first book is called Trust No One, and that
Which I just finished, and it's a very good book. Highly recommended.
And you can find it at michaelhearns.com. That's michaelhearns.com. One more time, michaelhearns.com. Here's how to order.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes, you can get it at any independent bookstore or Amazon or Walmart, Target. They all have it in their catalog. So it's called Trust No One. Thank you, Steve, for the compliment. That storyline had kind of kicked around in my head for a while, and I got asked, and I'm sure Steve got asked a lot to write a tell-all, and I think he basically did with Narcos. And I didn't want to do a tell-all. I kind of wanted to do a fictional character, and I felt that the Coral Gables Police Department needed to be represented properly, good and bad, and tell the story of a South Florida detective, a young detective in the VIN unit, who's challenged with different cases and has to navigate his way through these cases. And I wanted to bring a part of what Steve and I and Morgan, I'm sure, did, but what Steve and I did in South Florida, I wanted to bring a part of that to the reader that they don't normally see in books and movies, and also bring a sequence of action that they don't normally see in books and movies. It's very, Steve will tell you, filling out forms, sending in paperwork is very boring. So, my books are authentic, but they're not boring. They're authentic in the sense that you're going to really hear the dialogue between dopers and CIs, and you're going to really feel the tension that Cade goes through. In every book, the first one, Trust No One, the second one, Grasp and Smoke, and the third one, One More Move, all three of them are highly researched. They're authentic to South Florida. They're geographically correct. They're chronologically correct. If I say there's a Miami Dolphin game, that game really did happen. If they order from a restaurant, they don't just order anything. They actually order from the menu of that restaurant. I researched title charts, moon phases, everything. So it's almost as if while you were living your life, you get this spy-optic view of Cade Taylor and what he's doing. And it's as if all this was going on around you. You just weren't aware of it. And that's kind of the life that Steve and I lived. We were doing things in South Florida that the average guy in the car parked next to us waiting for the light to change had no idea what we were doing, had no idea that we were trailing a car or doing something. So the books are gaining a lot of traction because people are there's a Cade Taylor legion of fans out there. Cade is not a perfect hero. He's not a perfect character. He has some flaws. He's dealing with his own emotional issues and some of the carnage that's gone on in his own life. But he stays in the fight. He doesn't give in. He doesn't give up, and he doesn't compromise. And he stays in the fight. And he recognizes that he's in a world that people don't fully understand, much like what Steve and I did. And he also recognizes that he has to stay one step ahead of everything. Would you agree, Steve, since you read it?
Oh, absolutely. That's why it's called Trust No One. And the ending, I'm not saying it. What I'm going to say is my view of the first one of Trust No One is it's a whodunit. And this ending is very surprising. There was 2 surprises. Who actually done it and who brings it to a close.
Well, Murph, there's a third surprise you forgot to tell everybody.
There's no pictures. I actually read
No, there's the fact that you could actually read it. That's the third surprise. Did Connie read it to you, or did you do a book on tape?
No, I actually got the book.
So the book is set in Trust No One is set in February of 1998. And then grasp and smoke, which is actually a term we use in criminal profiling. When you can see something in front of you, but you can't get your hands around it, it's as difficult as grasp and smoke. And Cade is once again challenged in this book, and this takes place in October of 98. And it's totally different, Steve. It's totally different. Some of the characters reoccur, but it's a totally different thing. And then the next one, One More Move, takes place in November. And all 3 of them are doing quite well in the sense that people who do read them seem to really enjoy them. There are people in the entertainment business who would like to see it. I've talked about optioning, and Steve knows that is not something that happens overnight, and that's not something that it's a long trail of. We're going to talk to Ethan, and when Ethan says yes, then we'll be with Sony, and then all of a sudden Ethan says no, and now Joel over at Fox wants it. It goes back and forth, and it's not.
It's horrible.
Yeah, it's a grind. So it's a lot of carrot dangling in front of you. I think you guys would like the other 2. I think, Steve, you'll enjoy these since you've had your first taste of Cade Taylor in the first book. I think you'll really enjoy the other 2 even more. Morgan, if you should choose to pick them up, I think you'll like them as well.
I'm a big reader. I read on average 40 to 50 books a year.
Wow.
And I'm actually working on my own. I actually have, if I got to get my ass finished, I've got it done. The first one done. I'm in the process of my second round of edits to it. I'm really got to cut word count down.
Just as full disclosure here, Michael, he counts the coloring books too.
Yeah.
Dude, if it sells, it sells.
Well, like I said earlier when we were off mic, I said, people will call me and they'll say, "Hey, I'm reading your book," and I'll go, "Oh, hey, thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm on page 204," and I go, "Okay, yeah, I'm on 204."
Like you know what's on 204,
and I go, "I don't know what that means," and I go, "You got to tell me what's happening." "Oh, okay, all right, okay. Well, you just did this and you just did that." And I'll go, "That's not me. It's Cade Taylor." And they go, yeah, I know, but it's you. And I go, "No, it's not me. It's Cade Taylor." Cade Taylor's who you're reading, not me.
The book was good enough that I'm going to order the next 2.
I hope so. I would love to personalize those for you if opportunity ever should come. We're in the same geographical space. Coming from you, that's a big compliment because you lived that life. And I think you can see reflections of your own image in the Cade Taylor book since you lived that life.
Yeah, just and being that it was based in Miami during the same time frame, basically, that's what I like about it.
Yeah, it's very authentic in
your mind
to Miami.
As you're reading, you're picturing everything in your mind, and I know a lot of the places that you're talking about down through there.
Yeah, and some of those places aren't around anymore. And like in the book that Steve read, Trust No One, there's a pivotal scene that takes place on the street, and that street has been renamed now. It's not the same name. So some people go, "Hey, that street doesn't exist anymore." Well, it did in 1998. So everything is very accurate. Very, very accurate to the times.
So let me ask you a quick question on that. Who's your favorite, as you were looking at this, who were some of the authors that inspired you? Who do you read?
I'm not as big a reader as you are, only because for the last 3 years I've been writing books, and in reading other people's material, it's sometimes I don't want to be swayed or influenced or subconsciously pick up something from someone else. But in times past, I think the three of us can all raise our hand and say we read Lee Child, we read Michael Connelly. There is an author out of Vermont, Archer Mayer. I've read him a few times. He has a procedural series. This is what I'm trying to do with Cade Taylor is kind of a procedural series. You can read the books out of order and there will be no spoilers. But if you do it like Steve's doing it, if you read them in order, there will be references made to previous books and you'll know what they're talking about. But if you read them out of order, you won't be like lost or spoilers. And when you do a procedural character, you have to like introduce everybody in each book. So as Cade Taylor or Major Brunson appears in the next book, you have to once again introduce who they are and who they are and who they are. And the thing that my wife picked up on is the Vin secretary in all three books. She says she's a Hispanic single mom, and every time she calls Cade, she always hangs up the phone with, "Okay, Joe, I've been told." Okay, Joe, I've been told, and that's how she always ends the books. And there's some humor in the books a little bit. There's some sarcasm. Cade is kind of sardonic. He's jaded a little bit. He's been singed in life a little bit, and I don't really flesh him out. Like I don't really overly describe him because I want people to have their own interpretation of him. They just kind of know what his hair looks like and what he looks like a little bit, but I don't really go into, like Jack Reacher in the Lee Child books. They always talk about how he's 6'6" with a size 13 shoe, and he's got hands the size of canned hams and stuff like that. I kind of let the reader do their own thing. The main thing I did, and you can barely see it, you guys can barely see it, is I always have Cade wearing a Hartford Whaler baseball hat when he wears a hat. And it's just my little homage to a defunct hockey team. It's like saying the Brooklyn Dodgers. It's like the Magnum PI with the Detroit Tigers. It's just a little homage to a hockey team nobody cared about. And yet he's in that, and it kind of shows the kind of character Cade Taylor is. He's holding on to strings and tendrils of things that bring comfort to him in life that don't bring it to other people. He's a Vin detective, and he's in Miami, and he's in situations where he can't really, as Steve said earlier, trust anybody, and he's navigating his way through all that.
I tell you, there were a lot of, not a ton, but there were several instances where his character did things, and I'm thinking, what in the hell did you do that for? Like, initially going in the hospital there towards the end. And I won't say any more than that because I don't want to give it away. When he went to the ATM machine, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? Or when he went to the stash house by himself, I'm just thinking, dude, that's not what you're supposed to do. What are you doing?
Obviously didn't listen to Boyd Holbrook in the training you gave him. Don't go in the house.
But I think what Steve's going to tell you is that, and what I do with all three books is everything counts. Everything matters. Mm-hmm. And what looks very innocuous and looks like it has no meaning has meaning in the end. He will do things and say things on page 14 that all of a sudden in page 90 makes total sense.
Exactly. It all ties together.
It all ties together in the end. Yeah, exactly. All three books are that way.
It's the old famous Anton Chekhov saying. It says, if you show a gun in Act 1, you better use it in Act 3. If you don't bring stuff out. Hey, well, let's do this too. Let's talk. That's your author side, but you're also continuing to do some training and stuff. And I got it right this time. Money laundering. Laundering. See, I got it wrong. It's
put it out there.
Too much travel, dude. It's like I got Kevin Black wrong, and I said Kevin Jackson. I meant Kevin Black.
Here's
laundering money.
Launderingmoney.com. Yeah, launderingmoney.com. The reason why was because back in the day, we all knew us guys in Miami. We knew Charles Intriago when he started ACAMS, and he was way ahead of the curve, and he got moneylaundering.com like 2 months before I got this. So I couldn't take that web name. So I became launderingmoney.com. And yes, I've taught law enforcement. I've taught banks, financial centers, analysts, ILEA. I taught a ILEA conference. All over. I heard you mention earlier you were in San Diego and going back to LA. I've taught in LA. I've taught in Coronado. I've taught in Nebraska, New York City, New York State, Florida. And what I tried to do with the money laundering AML instruction is I kind of teach it from a law enforcement point of view. Like there's actually one component of how to set up a UC AML task force. So the financial side gets more the banking aspect of it. But when I teach law enforcement, I do talk about how to handle informants. I talk about some officer safety issues. I'm a certified officer survival instructor. I bring some of that into the equation. I remind people that, this is not Hollywood. These are not bespectacled, white shirt, dark tie, accountants. This is money and people die for it all the time. I bring in some real-time cases. I take them through some actual cases from start to finish, show them how to handle cases. I give them some of the tips, how to deal with prosecution. It's one thing to seize money. It's another thing to keep it. You can seize all the money you want, but if you lose it in the court process, you need to be able to articulate to a judge, why that currency is deemed to be contraband. So, yeah. I teach all that.
It's the old Seinfeld episode about the rental car. You know how to take the reservation. You just don't know how to keep the reservation. So you know how to seize the money. You got to be able to keep it too.
Exactly.
Hey, so look, as we bring this to a close, as you reflect back over, and the reason I asked you about Cade Taylor before I dive into it, how much of Cade Taylor, and I don't want to say that you did the stories around it, but how much of that is you? How much of that, you don't always want to say it's an exact duplicate, but there's always some influence with the character. So how much of Cade Taylor is you?
Well, he got the girl in the end. I'll give you that much. Did you get the girl in the end?
I would. I think my wife gets angry when Cade Taylor has relationships.
Honey, but it's not for real.
I would venture to do the old Robin Masters on this one. You might have to decide for yourself how much, where does real life and where does literature coalesce together.
Well, but see, that would only happen if people know you. And so I'm asking you, the author, when you look at that character, how much of Cade Taylor do you see? How much of yourself do you see in Cade? You don't have to talk about the specifics, but
I'll just say you write what you know.
Explains it all.
Now, does Cade Taylor have long, flowing, beautiful black hair that's pulled into a ponytail, or is he more of a shortcut kind of guy?
I think right now the soft covers selling for $15.95 and the hardcover is $25.99. Or Steve could tell you. I think you'll be happy if you picked it, especially if you're traveling so much and reading. I think you'll be happy. You can get them on Kindle too if you want the e-version of them.
That's the way I have most of my stuff.
If you go to the Coral Gables VIN office and the secretary's there, Ileana, is that her name?
Yeah, in the book it's Ileana. Yeah.
Cade Taylor looks scuzzy. How about that?
All right, man. Well, hey, look, this has been good stuff. Great career,
yes.
Just well-rounded. You got to do a lot of stuff. Final parting thoughts as you look back on your career and your writing career, as you think about, where you go forward in like the next Cade Taylor book, is there anything else on the horizon for you other than a book? Anything else from the film and movie industry? Anything from the training side?
Steve will tell you this when it comes to TV and film. Don't say anything until there's something to say. Got a good positive phone call yesterday from New York about a different project that looks like very promising. We'll see where that goes. Once again, Steve and I both have had those carrots dangled in front of us multiple times. And, what happens with the three of us and people like us is when you go to a cocktail party or an event, everybody wants to hear your stories. And I actually find, and I told this to Steve earlier, I find it, I don't want to detract from, the host or the event. And I often come across as a very boring guy because if I told people I did this, I did this, I did that, I did this. They think I'm the biggest liar in the world. I mean, we go back to the Bond goo, really? You know, you can't even find your car keys. You're going to tell me that you handle kilos of cocaine, you handle cocaine keys, but you can't even find your car keys. And, so I don't really talk too much about things, and I keep a low profile because I don't think anybody would ever believe the historical things in life the three of us have had.
Truth is always stranger than fiction.
It is.
It really is.
But when I also told Steve too, when we first talked, is that, Oscar Wilde said, the world is full of men who live with lives of quiet desperation. We three have, and your other guests as well, have all stood on the abyss, and we've looked over the edge, and we've been smart enough to back away.
Damn right.
There's some scary shit out there, people.
Amen.
Just stay home. That's right.
Amen to that.
Well, let's bring this to a close. This is us saluting you, as we always do with all of our guests. Michael Hearns, which you can find him at michaelhearns.com. And also, and I'm going to get it right this time because I'm not going to mix it up because the other guy got the domain. It's launderingmoney.com. So go to michaelhearns.com, get his Cade Taylor series. Go to launderingmoney.com to get all your training needs. And then come to gameofcrimespodcast.com and hear his interview, and find us on all the Apple platforms. So this is us saluting you, Mr. Michael Hearns, saying thank you very much, sir, for a job well done. Don't go anywhere. Marv, you were about to say something. Finish up.
I was just going to say thanks, Michael. It's been a treat to have you on here. When we vetted you, you sounded interesting, and you just proved it, buddy. So thanks for being in here, brother.
Well, I like that word, brother. Thank you, guys.
Always.
All right. You guys don't go anywhere. Everybody else, stay tuned for the debrief. Well, dude, man, that's like if there was a Dos Equis commercial, he might be starring in it. The most interesting man. That was some, you think about the career and stuff, but I mean, 22 million smackolas, simoleons.
I've never seen that much money. The largest I'd ever seen was 14 million, and it wasn't my case; it was somebody else's case. But 22, that's a big lick, man. And
that's probably what Javier's got hidden in his walls down there in San Antonio.
He's probably got that in his checking account. But I tell you what, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. The books, I read the first one, and it just ran right out of my brain here.
Trust no one.
Trust no one. And it's an interesting, and once you get into it, it's one of those books you can't put down. So we strongly encourage you to reach out and check out Michael's books. I'm going to order the second one and get started reading on that. I got to tell you guys, if you have a book, we try and read the book before we have you on the show, at least one. And I'll be honest, I haven't read this much. I didn't read this much when I was in college.
Well, it was tough, Murph. Fifth grade was the hardest 3 years of your life.
Darn right. Well, that was after second grade, But we had a blast with Michael. And that's one of the other things we love about this. We love bringing in our state and local partners because it's not just the feds that are working the big cases. I mean, Michael's a perfect example about persevering through all the challenges. I'll be nice and say challenges that can be encountered through competition amongst law enforcement agencies. Believe it or not, most cops are type A's, and they're very territorial about their investigations.
They want to do it right. But the other thing too, Murph, to your point, nobody parachutes into federal jurisdiction. They're all in some state or local jurisdiction somewhere, and everybody's got to work together. That's the only way it works. No man is an island unto himself.
So just, and when you don't work with everybody, the bad guys win. It's silly. Right. It's silly. I'm guilty of doing it in the past, but it is silly.
Well, look, and the other thing too is when you try and John Wayne it, go it alone, you're not going to solve many cases either because you're going to realize you do not have everything you need. But anyway.
Absolutely.
Good stuff, though. Check out michaelhearns.com, launderingmoney.com, and go hit up our page. Everything's on our webpage and in the show notes. So head on over there. Also, to head on over to Apple and Spotify. Hit those 5 stars. It's magic. We don't know how it's work. It's Disney, David Copperfield, David Blaine, all rolled into one. Also, head on over to gameofcrimespodcast.com. That's Game of Crimes Podcast.
That's what I said.
Yeah,
that's what I said.
That's what you said. That's what you meant to say. It sounded that just the podcast was silent. GameofCrimesPodcast.com. That's where the book list is. You'll see all of the Cade Taylor novels. I think you guys are going to like that. So one more time, Trust No One, One More Move, and Grasping Smoke. So some good novels there. Also follow us on that thing they call social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. But man, go check us out, patreon.com/Game of Crimes. All the good stuff is there. All the fun stuff is there. We really put a lot of effort into putting content. In fact, we have I know we do. We have more content, more hours per month through Patreon than we do on our free podcast here. So just give us a shot. Go check us out at patreon.com/Game of Crimes. And once again, we bring another exciting episode 87. Thank you to Manscaped for sponsoring this episode. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Check out their products. Both Murph and I got the products. I'm telling you, I was like a kid at Christmas opening that stuff up because they sent us everything. The trimmers, the shower gel, the beard products, the underarm deodorant. Oh man, that smells the best. I'm telling you, I'm going to smell so skippy next time I go out. Next time I take a shower.
You know this, Morgan, but we were out of town when the box was delivered, and so I got one of my neighbors to pick it up, and they're having the most fun in our neighborhood of talking about Murph getting a box from Manscaped. You gotta love it. Gotta love it.
Hey, but we love our sponsors too. So you guys check them out, manscaped.com. Just make sure you use GOC at checkout for 20% and free shipping. So just make sure you do that. Yeehaw. It's also in the ad that you heard earlier. So we thank you guys, and thank you guys once again for playing the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all. And the South Florida or Florida, somewhere in Florida, Coral Gables location friendly Game of Crimes.